Okay, here is some good news if you happen to be trans and you live in Europe. European court says transphobic countries must recognize trans people's names and genders. The decision is monumental and will help protect trans people across all 27 countries in the European Union, which is great news. Today, the Court of Justice of European Union ruled that member states must recognize legal documents from other countries that reflect a person's changed name and gender identity, regardless of the member state's own laws on changing one's name and identity. Which, like I said, is great. Let's see, what is today? Okay, so this was from October 4th. So slightly old news, but still good news. This decision comes in light of a Romanian transgender man, Arian Mirzarafi Ahi. I know I messed that one up. Who moved to the United Kingdom when the island country was still a member of the European Union. Mizrafi Ahi had legally changed his gender identity and name while in the United Kingdom. He attempted to use his newly changed UK documents to receive an altered birth certificate from Romania. However, the country did not recognize his altered name and identity, leading him to sue Romania in the CJEU. Romania argued that the name and gender change violated their laws, and that since the United Kingdom was no longer a member of the EU, any changes within that country do not need to be recognized by Romania under its obligations to other EU member nations. The court, however, argued that Romania's reasoning would unlawfully restrict EU citizens' freedom of movement and residence between different countries. Additionally, the court argued that Romania's policy would put an undue burden on individuals like Mirzarafi Ahi, who would then have to be known as two different names and genders in different countries, creating legislative hurdles as they attempt to prove their identity. The court said such policies would restrict the right to establish details of their identity as individual human beings, which include the right of transsexual people to personal development and physical and moral integrity, and to respect for and recognition of their sexual identity. The court also ruled that the status of the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union is irrelevant, as individuals are still within their rights during the United Kingdom's transition period while departing from the EU. When exercising his freedom of movement and residence in the United Kingdom before the withdrawal of that member state from the European Union and before the end of the transition period, respectively, he may rely against that member state of origin on the rights pertaining to that status, says the court. Mirzarafi Ahi told the Washington Post that this really is quite amazing, especially in light of his past experiences with Romania. When traveling to the country, he would often run into issues with border control, who would press him on the differences between his passport information and his actual appearance. They would ask invasive questions relating to what surgeries he had received and what his genitals were like. Romania refused to update his passport. I'm sorry, but even if you look different than your picture, asking about someone's genitals? What the hell? I mean, on what planet is that even relevant? Okay, he looks different. You know who else looks different than passport pictures? Drag queens. Nobody asks them, or at least I hope nobody asks them about their genitals. They just happen to wear drag sometimes. It is so ridiculous. People change appearances. I have met plenty of women who every day they look completely different because they have to have a different hairstyle for every day of their life. And yes, it makes them look different. People change their appearance, especially at least in the US. You get a passport for 10 years. Now you could say that with adults that, their appearance generally stays static, but they still sometimes change. People go through fads and phases, just like kids do, of, oh, I feel like this, and this is the way you wear your hair or do your makeup or what clothes you wear, and then you change to something else. That's a thing. So, but what does your genitals have to do with it? I mean, if your documents say that you are male, but you present as female, well, that could be that they just happen to like looking feminine. Or maybe you shouldn't be so hung up on what gender looks like what. Anyway. Now, however, he can openly state that he is from Romania. I'm not sure that just because they're being forced to accept your gender and your gender identity and the changes in your passport, I don't think that I would be so happy to say I'm from Romania when they literally had to be forced into it. Not sure that that's worth being happy about, but anyway. This decision reflects a similar case from 2018 when the CJEU ruled that member states have to recognize same-sex marriages from other countries, even if they themselves do not allow such unions. The court's ruling faced immense pushback from more conservative EU countries like Bulgaria, which argued that the ruling would restrict their individual rights. Oh, the fucking irony. Seeing two people who happen to be married is somehow restricting your individual rights. What the hell? I mean, what are you exactly afraid of? That the majority of the population will see a happy couple who happens to be of the same sex and realize that your laws not allowing it are stupid? Because that is actually what I hope happens to a lot of these restrictive countries. That they'll see that same-sex marriage is allowed, that trans people are allowed to exist, and the world didn't come to a fucking end. So yeah, maybe that will happen. But how is that restricting your individual rights? Nobody is saying you have to allow your citizens to marry the same sex or allow trans people to exist. Just visitors can't be forced to follow your rules. So, that just because they have human dignity in one country and they're visiting another country doesn't mean that their human dignity suddenly goes to shit. So, no, you're not being restricted in any way. I mean, I'm sorry that you can't force everybody to conform to what you want them to be, but the pushback is that those people just won't visit your country. So, you're going to miss out on economic opportunity because those people won't want to go to a country where they are forced to hide who they are. Anyway, This, where was I? Where was I? The same may be argued by EU member states now, says Catherine Bernard, an expert in EU law at the University of Cambridge. Of course, to liberals, it's a good thing to use the courts to push Romania to become more progressive. But if you're more conservative or hostile to the EU, you can say, how dare the EU interfere with things that go to the heart of our beliefs, Bernard told the Washington Post. Okay. If you want to believe that gay people shouldn't get married or trans people shouldn't exist, then don't get gay married, don't be trans, and don't, do your best to not be around those people. And you can just sit in your little cave and have your little beliefs. But to claim that as a society, everyone must follow those beliefs, even if the majority of the society has those beliefs, you have your laws. The EU is not saying you have to allow that for your citizens. The EU is just saying that visitors can't be forced to follow your laws in that regard, because they get to follow the civil rights of the country that they reside in. So, again, nobody is forcing your beliefs to change. Now, if you, like I said, you see a gay couple in your city who happens to be from a foreign country, so they're allowed to exist, or a trans person is allowed to exist, and you witness them, and you realize that the world did not come to an end because they exist, and you change your beliefs, how is that a bad thing? That you exhibited personal growth. If it's true, and hopefully it is, that people will see that there's nothing wrong with these people, and you'll take a freaking chill pill and relax, and perhaps the laws might change, that's a good thing. But that's not because you were forced to change the laws. You just couldn't force others to cease to exist. Anyway, I realize it's a very fine line, but it is still a line. All right. Mirza Rafi Ahi's legal counsel, human rights lawyer Justina Ionescu, I hope I said that right, said in a statement, today's verdict has shown us that trans people are equal citizens of the European Union. When you have rebuilt a life in another part of the European Union because you are not welcome in your own country, it is normal to ask to be treated with dignity when interacting with the authorities in your home country. And that's all they're asking for. Okay, I live in this other country who allows me to be who I am, but for whatever reason, I have to sometimes visit my home country. I might have family there who may or may not hate my guts for simply existing, and I want to visit them. I might have friends. I might have business. So they go to their home country or a different country, which, again, if they have business in that country, they do not have to hide who they are, simply because the country they're visiting sucks ass. Okay, Marie-Helene Ludwig, senior strategic litigator with the LGBTQ plus rights organization ILGA Europe, said in a statement, today's ruling confirms that without mutual recognition of legal gender recognition from one member state to another, the right to freedom of movement and residence is not guaranteed for trans people in the EU. It is a great victory that shows the power of strategic litigation in the EU. This judgment will have an immensely positive impact, increasing legal protections for all trans people in the EU. All the more as certain EU countries like Romania still do not provide a legal framework for legal gender recognition conforming with European Court of Human Rights standards, Ludwig added. So they're part of the EU, but they don't want to follow EU law. That's awesome. Anyway, that is great news. And like I said, if I understand this article correctly, it only is affecting the people who come from outside of that country to go visit, whether it be that they happen to to have moved to another country and went back home to visit, or that within say Romania, this changes nothing, that it's only is good for people who got their documentation elsewhere and came back to Romania for whatever reason, that documentation has to be respected, but that you would have to leave the EU to do that, as opposed to you would have to leave Romania to do that. You couldn't do that in Romania, so it doesn't change Romanian law. All it will do is that now trans people and possibly same-sex couples can now know that they can leave leave Romania, go to an EU country that allows for them to exist, get married or change their gender identity, and go back to Romania. Now, I don't know why they would want to do that, why they would want to go back to a repressive country that doesn't acknowledge their existence. Again, I can understand how this would work for people who are on business and have to travel to a certain country where, if this law didn't exist, that country could basically ignore their existence, ignore their identity. But I can't understand why, like this person from Romania, okay, now I can be proud to say I'm Romanian. Why? They fundamentally still hate you. They just legally can't do anything about the fact that you exist. That does not mean that they've changed the way they see you. So why are you proud to be Romanian? If Romania changed their laws because Romania realized that they were being dicks, that would be one thing. But that's not what happened here. The EU is basically saying, okay, if you leave a country and get married or change your gender, and you go back to that country for whatever reason, it has to be respected. For people in the US, it would be basically the same as, for those who understand history or are old enough, if you were to go to a state where interracial marriage was legal, and you went back to a state where it wasn't recognized, your federal rights, your legal rights trumps whatever the state says. So even if you're in a state where they would hate your guts, they have to still respect your marriage. So it's similar to that. And which basically the EU is basically the United States of Europe. Only it's a bit more complicated because even though we're a United States, we have one federal government and we do have state governments, but federal law supersedes state law, or at least it does when, unless the far right says they don't like the federal law, they don't like the federal law, so all of a sudden state law will supersede, but our court has gone completely insane. But that is how it initially was. With the EU, I'm not sure how that works, because that's more complicated, because we're dealing with separate states. They don't have the EU government in Brussels isn't exactly like the US's federal government, and that the country governments are more like state government. That's not how it is. So it's a bit more complicated, but in general, that's what they're going for. That's why they have a Schengen area where you can freely walk about if you're a citizen of the EU. So there is some similarities, but it's not quite the same. But yeah, basically that's what they're trying to do. The EU wants trans people to feel comfortable no matter what country they're in. If they, obviously they would still have to go to a country that allows for same-sex marriage or allows for changing your gender identity. But if they were to go back to their original country for whatever reason, the original country can't say, oh yeah, we don't recognize that, sorry. Because as members of the EU, they need to have some sort of baseline. That you can't be in one EU country and have one set of laws regulating human civil rights, and then you go to another country which has differing laws. There has to be some sort of balance. So even though the individual countries might have different laws, they have to respect the laws of the other countries. So if you got married in a different country and went back for whatever reason, they can't say, oh, well, since you're here, while you're here, we're not going to recognize your marriage. Yeah, you have to, because you're a part of the EU, so you have to respect that I got married in an EU country. So you need to respect that. It's like if you got married in the US and you came to, anybody getting married, and people in the EU saying, yeah, you didn't get married here, so we're not going to accept it. Okay, there's got to be some standard. So anyway, before I say something that's going to get me into trouble or something completely boneheaded and wrong, I am going to end it right there. And with that, I will see you guys in the next video.